Hi everyone, we're starting with the endocrine system in this video. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to outline the locations of some of these glands in the endocrine system. So let's just zoom in for a moment. I know that my students have this in their notes. Mrs. Saunders students, you may have a slightly different diagram, but you'll have locations nonetheless. All right, so I'm just going to point out that there are two main glands that, well, technically I would say three, okay? Three main glands that you need to know are located in the brain. The first of them is going to be the pituitary gland. It's a little pea-sized enlargement found at the base of the hypothalamus, which is the second one that we're going to be talking about. It is not labeled in this particular diagram, but that's the hypothalamus. All right, let's just make sure we know what that gland is because it's going to have an important job in controlling the pituitary. In addition, towards the back is the pineal gland, which is going to be helpful in regulating our sleep and wake cycles. All right, so let's move our way down a little bit farther and highlight the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is found in your neck, and its job is going to be to regulate your metabolism. Your thymus is located behind your sternum. Time out. The parathyroids are two pairs of glands that are located towards the back of the thyroid. They're on the posterior side. So they're on the back. And these are important for calcium regulation. Moving a little farther south, on the tops of the kidneys, you have the little caps that are the adrenal glands. In between the two, you have this Nike swoosh shaped pancreas. And then you have the reproductive structures of the uterus, the ovaries, and the testes, right? All of these are a series of glands. And so let's fill this in real quickly for my students. A series of glands. And these glands produce regulatory hormones, which are chemicals. They all help to regulate and maintain homeostasis. You'll hear me say that term a lot today. So this is your first full page of notes. And before we get started, I want to ask you to please take a moment, pause the video, and go get yourself a sheet of blank paper, or it can be lined paper, which is fine. And you're going to need two different colors of either pen or pencil, right? Because we're going to be doing some drawing in a moment. So, the endocrine system, which is a series of glands that help to maintain homeostasis, they do this by using regulatory mechanisms called feedback mechanisms. The term is used to describe a change in one or more hormones that help to regulate another quantity of hormone. These all travel in the bloodstream. Hormones are released directly into the bloodstream. Now, we're going to take a time out here and we're going to outline negative and positive feedback mechanisms. Okay, so assuming that you got your sheet of paper, we're going to graph the positive feedback mechanism first that you need to be familiar with. So if on your sheet of paper, you can create a real quick axis. It doesn't have to be straight like mine. I used a ruler, but just make an axis on there and let's label this positive feedback. And that positive feedback mechanism that we're going to be focusing on is oxytocin production from the pituitary in childbirth. All right, so let's talk about what's happening and what's controlling this system. So I'm going to make a little sketch here. Feel free to uh, improve on my drawing because I'm not a good artist by any stretch. All right, so this this does not look like a person this time, but all right, we're gonna pretend that this is a little baby in here. All right, so inside of the uterus is this little baby, and the baby, as it's getting closer and closer to delivery, the baby's head is going to press downward on the cervix. All right, so pressure on the cervix is going to send a nerve signal, right? The mechanoreceptors that are found in there, they're stretch receptors, and they sense the stretching of that muscle tissue, and it sends a nerve signal to the pituitary. And in response, the pituitary gland is going to secrete oxytocin. And oxytocin is going to cause uterine contractions that are going to force the baby's head downward. As this muscle contracts, it's going to make the space smaller. The only exit is the cervix. And so the oxytocin is going to cause contractions. That contraction is going to push the baby downward, and that's going to amplify this nerve signal again and again, creating more oxytocin. So let's graph how this looks. This would be oxytocin levels. If we label the y-axis oxytocin levels, and the x-axis can be time. If we're tracking oxytocin levels, at the start, oxytocin levels are probably pretty low. But as more and more time goes on, there's going to be greater pressure on the cervix, which is going to cause oxytocin increase. And the result is uterine contraction. That contraction results in elevated amounts of oxytocin production, which is going to result in increased frequency and increased duration of contractions as time goes on. And this will continue until, when is the system going to stop? There's an increase until pressure is released. That's childbirth. Once the pressure is off of the cervix, because the baby has passed through, the oxytocin levels will drops slightly. There's more to be said about that whole process, but that is, in a nutshell, what's going to happen. Oops, I just tore my sheet a little bit. Let's talk about negative feedback now. All right, this is the opposite. Of course, try and keep my sheet in place, and there we go. That'll be a little better. All right, so now let's do negative feedback. So flip it over and give yourself another little graph, and we'll do negative feedback. Whoops. Feedback. I didn't know how to spell. All right, so there are two versions of this. You'll see that I have another grid down here, another graph ready down here. So just prepare yourself. Two different examples here. In negative feedback, the response will reverse a trend. All right. In the example that we're going to cover first, the thyroid regulation of metabolism. Woo, I'm out of space. Metabolism. All right, let's take a little drawing just so we can identify where we are in the body. No excessively large baby to draw in this one, but we do have a thyroid gland in the neck to draw. The thyroid produces the hormone thyroxine. The other gland that's involved here is the pituitary gland. And the pituitary produces TSH, that is thyroid stimulating hormone. And that pituitary gland is found right in the center of your brain. So we have TSH and thyroxine. We're going to graph those to show how those hormone levels oh my goodness. Every once in a while you just have a hard time spelling when I've done this 5 times perfectly, and this is the one time that it's actually going to work, right? This is time. So now you're going to need 2 colors. If you didn't get 2 colors when I mentioned it earlier, you might want to do that now, okay? Because I'm going to use black for TSH, and I'm going to use red for thyroxine. Now let's start with the pituitary levels of thyroid stimulating hormone. So this is the stimulation point, right? So as thyroid stimulating hormone levels increase, you would assume, and you would be right to assume, that this is going to cause an increase in thyroxine. So 1 causes an increase in the other. And there's a slight delay here, right? Notice the peak of thyroxine follows the peaking of TSH. Well, there's an important regulating mechanism that is the defining part of what a negative feedback is. Thyroxine has an additional role. It increases metabolism, but also inhibits the pituitary. All right. So it inhibits the pituitary production of TSH. There's your feedback right there. All right. So as thyroxine levels have gone up, the TSH levels are going to be inhibited. So they will start to drop. And as a result of that, there's less stimulation of the thyroid. And so the thyroxine levels drop, and that's going to cause a drop in the inhibition of the pituitary. So the pituitary gland recovers and starts to increase, and we see this dance over the course of a day. There's going to be over and over the rise and fall of pituitary hormone and thyroxine. And if you look closely at it, you see the peaks correspond with each other. And that is going to keep them within an acceptable range, and we call that homeostasis. That's homeostasis. All right, let's look at another example now. Now, this example, also negative feedback. But this particular one is going to be about blood sugar regulation. Blood sugar regulation is done with one gland, the pancreas. That's that Nike swoosh looking gland that we saw earlier, all right, during class. And it produces two hormones, all right? This will be reviewed once we go back to our note sheet, right? There are two hormones. There is glucagon and there's insulin. Insulin decreases blood sugar, and glucagon increases blood sugar. So we've identified the two hormones that are going to be competing here. And when we create this graph, we're going to, instead of labeling it as hormone levels, we're actually just going to track blood sugar. All right. Well, let's talk about it. You wake up in the morning and your blood sugar is probably pretty low. You haven't eaten since the night before. So what's keeping you from dying from lack of nutrients? Well, in this case, glucagon. Glucagon, in order to remember this, when glucose is gone, the pancreas produces glucagon. Now, there's a lot of glues in here. In fact, you'd even talk about the liver converts glycogen into sugar. So you have a little bit to survive on. As glucagon is produced by the pancreas, blood sugar is maintained until you eat. So somewhere along here, you're going to have breakfast. And your sugar level's going to shoot up. Now, you don't want this. You don't want it to rise out of control. All right? That would be bad. So you need to have some way to keep your blood sugar from going too high. That's where the pancreas produces insulin. And that is a signal to all the cells of your body that there's sugar available in the blood. Pull it into your cells. And as they pull the sugar out of the blood and into the cells, the available sugar will start to drop. And so, as a result, as that number goes lower and lower, that blood sugar value goes lower and lower, that's bad. When glucose is gone, glucagon is going to be secreted again, keeping you okay until you have a snack and your blood sugar goes up again. And to keep it from going too high, insulin is there and secreted. That tells your cells there's something to eat. Blood sugar drops over the period of time. You might have lunch, and then your blood sugar goes up again. And this continues over the course of the day, where glucagon keeps your blood sugar from dropping too low, and insulin keeps it from going too high. It keeps it within, again, we're talking about a normal range. The term for that is homeostasis. Got to know that term. It's a big one. All right. Now, the only disorder that you really need to know about this is diabetes. Diabetes is lack of insulin production. Or it can be lack of insulin receptors. But either case, the job is not going to be done. So there's no regulation. And that can be very detrimental to your health. All right, well, let's go back over to our notes. So now that we're back, let's talk about the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is called the master gland frequently. It connects to the hypothalamus, which is located just superior to it or just above it. And this hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland by producing releasing factors. So they come from the hypothalamus. The pituitary releases a whole bunch of different chemicals. These hormones include thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, that stimulates the production of thyroxine. And thyroxine, which we just talked about from the thyroid, increases your metabolism. The second one that comes from the pituitary gland is adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. This stimulates the release of hormones from the adrenal glands, which gives me the opportunity to point out that often the naming will help you know where it's coming from and what it does. So, adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the release from the adrenal glands, and it's going to produce adrenaline and cortisol. The third one on here, growth hormone. Growth hormone is responsible for controlling the growth of bone and cartilage. I would ask you to also add in here muscle, right? And the reason why this is important, oh, right? The reason why muscle is important is because often people will use human growth hormone to increase their muscle mass. This is not uncommon. Professional athletes will often cheat a little bit by taking HGH, which is human growth hormone. And they work out a whole bunch. Their muscles grow faster than individuals who don't take HGH, and that gives them a competitive advantage. There are definitely adverse side effects with the use of HGH and other steroid hormones. The next on this list is follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. This is important in the reproductive system because it causes the development of egg and sperm. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, causes the release of the egg during the female menstrual cycle, and it also stimulates the production of male and female sex hormones. That's going to include testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. Next on this list is prolactin, and prolactin stimulates the secretion of milk by the mammary glands. I added one more on here because it's in our graph that we created earlier. Oxytocin, which is stimulated by which is produced by the pituitary gland. It is responsible for causing uterine contractions, but it also has other effects as well, and including pair bonding and emotional relationship bonding between mom and child. The production of oxytocin has a significant effect on bonding mechanisms. All right, next on this is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland secretes thyroxine, as we talked about earlier. I'm going to highlight a couple of disorders here. Hyperthyroidism. The prefix hyper means high levels. Hyperthyroid means you have too much thyroxine. And you might think that's great because if your metabolism is high, you don't have to worry about gaining a lot of weight. Lots of people can eat and eat and eat and eat, and they don't seem to put on any weight. Some people really like that. Other people, it's a frustration. But here's the thing. Unusually high levels of thyroid hormone can result in some negative side effects, including hypertension, racing heartbeat, so high blood pressure, increased heart rate, muscle shakes like twitchiness, and it increases your risk for heart failure and heart attack. So it's not desirable to be hyperthyroid, even though people who have a higher metabolism can eat more and not gain weight. Too high is not good either. Hypo is the exact opposite. It's very low metabolism because of low thyroxine production. This can make you feel sluggish, cause weight gain. These are the people who say, oh, I just look at food and I gain weight. Well, that's because their metabolism is so low that they're not utilizing the materials that they're putting in. The parathyroid gland is next, and these are the pairs of glands found on the back of the thyroid. These secrete a hormone called parathormone, and that hormone is very important for calcium and phosphate regulation. Calcium is very important in bone development, and your secretion of parathormone helps to control that. It also is very important in muscle function because your muscles require a lot of calcium to function properly. Next on this list is the adrenal glands. These help the body deal with stress. This is going to cause the fight or flight response. Sorry about that jump there. What occurs during your fight or flight response? Make a little note in here. You're going to have increased respiration, increased perspiration, increased heart rate, and increased blood pressure. The sweat, the breathing, the blood flow increase all help you prepare to either fight for your life or run for your life. That's the idea behind the fight or flight response. As I mess up my notes here, the adrenal glands also produce corticosteroids. I mentioned earlier. They regulate glucose levels in your blood, and under stress, your body produces cortisol. And cortisol is a corticosteroid that tells your body, hey, this is a bad time right now. It's a time when we might not survive. You better save everything you can. So cortisol tells your body to store any unused materials. And so the result is you end up with weight gain as a result of stress levels of cortisol. The pancreas has two areas that are active in the production of hormones. They're contained in a region known as the Isles of Langerhans. There are two types of cells here, alpha cells and beta cells. Alpha cells secrete glucagon, which we learned about in the graphing. Glucagon promotes the conversion of glycogen into glucose from the liver. Right? That sugar is then available in the bloodstream and you don't die. Beta cells, on the other hand, secrete hormones, the hormone insulin, and after you eat, glucose levels get high, so the beta cells start to secrete insulin. That tells your body cells to take sugar out of the blood. The disorder we identified in there is the disorder diabetes. It's the failure to produce or respond to insulin. It can come in type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We'll discuss that further if we need to, but let's keep moving forward here with the gonads. These are the sex glands. Females, the ovaries are responsible for producing their gametes or sex cells called eggs, and the testes produce the male gametes, which are sex cells. They're called sperm. All right, so that's the part that you probably did know. The estrogen and progesterone is produced by the ovaries, and this stimulates secondary sex characteristics in females. You need to know what these secondary sex characteristics are. So actually what I'll do is I'll just throw a little text box in here. We'll make a list. All right. So we're going to include in this list, we're going to include the menstrual cycle. Oops, I didn't spell that correctly. The menstrual cycle, breast development, the hips get wider, and you'll have body hair. I think that sums it up. I think that's all of them as I'm trying to do this quickly for you. All right. So let's jump down to the male hormone testosterone. And testosterone not only causes sperm development, but it also stimulates secondary sex characteristics in males. Now, in order to make this a little easier, I'll just duplicate this and I'll remove the things that don't happen. All right. So we're not going to have in guys wider hips. We're not going to have breast development or a menstrual cycle, but we sure are going to have body hair and we're going to add facial hair to it. You're going to have facial and body hair. You're going to have voice deepens. You're going to have muscle and bone development beyond what females have. And a great indicator of how this testosterone does this is how people will sometimes use steroid hormones that are like testosterone to help them build body mass. But there are definitely some adverse secondary side effects to this, which can be uh, I don't know. Maybe I'll just list them: erectile dysfunction, gynecomastia, breast development. It all depends on what you're doing with your body. And if you have questions about this, of course, ask your teacher, because both Mrs. Saunders and I can explain that in greater detail. Last two on here are the thymus, which secretes thymosin, and we learned about T lymphocytes, or white blood cells, during the immune system. This is active during your childhood. And last on here is the pineal gland, and that secretes melatonin, which stimulates pigment production. But more importantly, I think it's good to note that the pineal gland regulates your sleep and wake cycles, which is why using your cell phone can be such a problem at night. If you're getting a lot of screen time late at night, it tricks your brain into thinking that it's daytime because of the elevated light levels. And that's going to disrupt your melatonin production and disrupt your sleep and wake cycles. I hope you will ask any questions of us that you might come up with while you're thinking about this. But in the meantime, have a great day. Talk to you soon.